Okay, if you made it to this one, if you watched the other two videos this week, congratulations. This will be the shortest of all three. Another Valentine's image there for you. That's actually, I think, an image of Saint Valentine, who I think there were several, at least in the Catholic Church, saints with the name Valentine, which apparently was a pretty common name at some point in AD 200 to 700 or somewhere in there, a long time ago. But anyway, the person that St. Valentine's Day, the holiday, is kind of based on. It's interesting if you just Google it and look up some information about things I didn't know. So that's what I did to celebrate Valentine's Day. I looked up a little bit of information about that. But anyway, that's an image. I think that's a stained glass window from a church somewhere in Europe. Um, and again, tomorrow, if you're watching this on Sunday or Monday, Monday is Valentine's Day, or whenever you're watching this, I hope you had a good Valentine's Day. So our reading lecture, we're going to just talk really briefly about a story called A Temporary Matter, just to get started with it, and then also our reading for this week, which is on prenatal care, which again, you'll see how that can connect to Hills Like White Elephants. It can definitely connect to Jhumpa Lahiri's story, A Temporary Matter, as well. So, like we've done with the other story, just to think about the characters. Again, you want to try to understand as much as you can about the two characters. And so in this story, we're going to have a couple who are going through, it's kind of a tough time, and we don't know why. And like a lot of stories, just like the Hemingway story, like the Junot Diaz story, where we read about the guys delivering the pool tables in Edison, New Jersey, we don't really know until we read this story what's going on with them, but we sense there's something under the surface. And maybe that's sort of a way that modern writers do this. They kind of make us curious to know more about. But obviously, there's something, as you read this, you'll notice that the couple is not, their relationship is off somehow. And to understand why, you'll see within 3 or 4 pages, you'll start to understand probably why the relationship is if you're reading carefully. But the question then becomes, how is this going to end? How's the story going to end? Are they going to come through it together, or are they going to end up being separate? So we have our two characters, two main characters, and you'll see as you look at the story on the, we'll talk about this in just a minute when we get into it. But you have Shobha and Shukumar are the two characters. So they're both Indian American young people. I mean, I think they're in their 30s, so not terribly young, but not old yet. And we'll see how the idea of having children is a big part of this story, whether they will or won't. And you might have noticed too, this image, I like it because it's candlelight. So you might think it's a very romantic kind of Valentine's Day type story, but there's a reason why they're using candlelight, and it's not about romance, I don't think. Although maybe Shukumar thinks that maybe it is. So we'll look at that as you get into the story more. Here's just a little snippet of the first couple of paragraphs, and I just wanted to get us started. Shobha and Shukumar are the two main characters in the story. Let's just look at this together for just a moment. Again, to get us into the story, the notice informed them that it was a temporary matter. So there we have our title of our story is A Temporary Matter. What is this temporary matter? Well, for 5 days, their electricity would be cut off for 1 hour, beginning at 8 p.m. A line had gone down in the last snowstorm, and repairmen were going to take advantage of the milder evenings to set it right. The work would affect only the houses on the quiet, tree-lined street, within walking distance of a row of brick-faced stores and a trolley stop, where Shobha and Shukumar had lived for 3 years. So there we have a lot going on. We have our characters, Shobha and Shukumar. We have the setting, and we know it's in a city, sounds like, right? Because there's a trolley stop. We know that there's been a snowstorm, so we know it's kind of winter, but maybe toward the end of winter, like maybe March, because we hear that the repairmen are going to use the milder evenings, kind of like we're having the last couple of nights, where it's been warmer and things have been melting, to try to fix this line that went down a few weeks ago in a snowstorm. It's good of them to warn us, Shobha conceded after reading the notice aloud, more for her own benefit than Shukumar's. She let the strap of her leather satchel, plump with files, slip from her shoulders, and left it in the hallway as she walked into the kitchen. She wore a navy blue poplin raincoat over gray sweatpants and white sneakers. Looking at 33, like the type of woman she'd once claimed she would never resemble. So here we have maybe a couple who have been together for a while. Um, she's coming in. She's wearing clothes that maybe you're not too attractive or fancy or anything. Like this idea of she's 33 and she's kind of looking in this way like maybe she didn't want to when she was younger. So and doesn't say too much to her husband, I believe. It doesn't really say if they're married. Now I have to think back about that. I think they're husband and wife, but they are definitely living together. Okay, so the setting is another thing to consider. That gives us a little bit about the character, a little bit about the setting. We know it's in a city. We know that it's a city that's probably fairly north because they have snowstorms, and we know that there's going to be this repair going on. So again, as you read, maybe you can figure out what city it is. I know what city it is, but I won't tell you right now. We might talk about that as we get into this a little bit more. It's not Chicago, by the way, further east. This is a little bit more about the setting and just one more short excerpt from the story here. Oh, whoops, just told you. Boston during a recurring power outage. Recurring means this power outage is going to repeat quite a few times. A sheaf of mail on the table. Without a glance, she looked at that. Her eyes were still fixed on the notice in her one hand. Remember, this is the notice from the power company. But they should do this sort of thing during the day. This is what she thinks, right? And then he says, when I'm here, you mean, Shukumar said. He put a glass lid on a pot of lamb, adjusting it so only the slightest bit of steam could escape. Since January, he'd been working at home, trying to complete the final chapters of his dissertation on agrarian revolt in India. When do the repairs start? So Shukumar is a graduate student working on a dissertation, which is part of a PhD. So, these are highly educated people, but it sounds like, working toward their education still. So it sounds like she's working, he's at home trying to finish his education. It says March 19th. So there we have the date. Is today the 19th? Shobha walked over to the framed corkboard that hung on the wall by the fridge, bare except for a calendar of William and Morris wallpaper patterns. She looked at it as if for the first time, studying the wallpaper pattern carefully on the top half before allowing her eyes to fall to the numbered grid on the bottom. A friend had sent the calendar in the mail as a Christmas gift, even though Shobha and Shukumar hadn't celebrated Christmas that year. So there's a little hint right there. Something's maybe not quite right because it doesn't sound like they don't always celebrate Christmas, but some reason this year they had chosen not to celebrate Christmas. Sounds like they're not in a celebratory mood for some reason. Again, that's part of the story. And like I said earlier in the semester, all these stories that we're reading, at the core of them, they have something about a relationship, how people are relating to each other, maybe not too well. Today, then, Shobha announced, you have a dentist appointment next Friday, by the way. So they're looking at the refrigerator, trying to figure out if this is going to happen. So this thing is going to start. Their power is going to go off. So we can gather that it's kind of late winter. They're in the city. The husband's struggling to get his education finished. The wife's working, the man, the woman, and we get a sense that maybe there's something not quite right about their relationship. And now suddenly they're going to be stuck together with the power off every night, which means he can't just go to his computer and work, and they can't ignore each other. They're going to be thrown back together, so to speak. And it seems like, as you see, they've been kind of ignoring each other, but this is going to push them into a different direction. As you read through, you may, again, like we did with the previous story, think about the language and how is it poetic? Is it more just literal language? I would say this is pretty plain language, but there's some imagery. But take a look at that as you read through. And think about point of view. Who's telling the story? Is Shukumar, the male, the guy, telling the story? Or is it Shobha, the woman, telling the story? Or is it that third person where somebody's standing outside and saying he and she, and we're seeing both inside both their minds and their worlds? So as you read, consider that, just as we did with the previous couple of stories. The other thing we've talked about is themes when we're looking at a story like this, because these are things you can bring into your essay. Are there any universal themes in the story? Some of the things, obviously, that you'll see, there are things that deal with childbirth and a baby and pregnancy and a couple, married couple, and all this. You'll also see some things maybe about ambition or wanting to do something, but then getting into their 30s and feeling some pressure and so on. And then, this sort of theme of, should we stay together or should we work this out? Is it worth it? Or are we at the point where it's time to end the relationship? So these are some of the themes I think you'll see, but you'll probably see other things too as you read through this story. Now remember, this story we're not going to be writing about for essay 3, but I just want you to go ahead and get a start on this one because otherwise we could get behind. But if you haven't read the story, Edison, New Jersey by Junot Diaz. Go back and read that. That's more of a priority. This one is going to be for essay 5 and 6. So it's a couple of weeks down the road before we're even going to be writing about this. So again, if you haven't read, or if you haven't read Hills Like White Elephants, for sure you want to go back and read that one first. It's very short. If you've read Hills Like White Elephants but haven't read Junot Diaz's Edison, New Jersey, read that first. But again, this is our third story, and it's all about this couple. And again, I think the big question is, are they going to be together at the end of this, or are they not going to be together? They've been through something kind of traumatic, definitely traumatic, and they're trying to sort of find their way, it seems like. So you'll have to see by reading that story. And I would suggest this week you just read the first half, 10 pages. And by the way, those 10 pages, it's pretty, it's not really like super dense text. So 10 pages is it's not a whole lot to read, but it's, and the way it's written is pretty straightforward. So hopefully you can do that over the next week or so for our reading. And the reading summaries for week 5, again, pages 1 to 10 of A Temporary Matter, by Jhumpa Lahiri. She's an Indian American writer. She didn't really grow up in India. I think she was born in London, in England, moved to the East Coast, I think lived in Rhode Island. So she really grew up in an English-speaking world, but it has lots, of course, close ties to her. I think her parents are from India. I don't know her whole biography, but at any rate, I knew she was born in England. But she writes about, most of her main characters tend to be either Indian descent, or she actually writes about people living in India in a lot of her other work as well. So that's a little bit about her, and then just her background. But take a look at for this week, just the first 10 pages of A Temporary Matter, and you can write about that for your reading summary. There's some questions that'll be under the course content folder for week 5. And remember, our summaries, just like the journals, are not due until near the end of the semester. For the journals this week, there's an article called Prenatal Care. And of course, again, the core of the story, a big part of the conflict and the trouble has to do with a baby in the story, A Temporary Matter. So you'll have to read that to see. But take a look at this article, Prenatal Care, which is also in our course materials folder. It's a short journal article from the library databases, Opposing Viewpoints. And there are 3 questions that you might want to look at for this journal. But again, with your journal, you can write about almost anything. So if this doesn't get your interest, as always, or if you kind of struggle with this, your journal, you could write about, well, I went shopping, I did, I bought some chili. That's what I did. And you can just write about that for your journal. The reading summaries, you have to write about the actual text, but for the journals, you can use the journal prompts or not. That's your choice. It's free writing for the journals, unlike the summaries. Okay, so again, that is everything. Like I said, this would be a short one. This is our story this week, A Temporary Matter. So take a look at that, and if you can, also look at that article, Prenatal Care, and these will be the article and the short story are both posted as PDFs in course content folder for week 5. Thanks again for watching, and again, I hope you had a nice Valentine's Day and enjoyed the Super Bowl if you watched that, or at least had some good food over the weekend.